Even though 13 different federal agencies helped write the report, the president isn't totally buying it.
More than 30% of these at-risk populations had hookworm.
What did you think when you got here and found out they had this?
I thought I was in haven for a minute, you know.
Ukraine's parliament has voted to enact martial law in parts of the country, a day after Russian ships fired at and captured 3 Ukrainian boats and their crews as they tried to cross the strait between Russia and Crimea. Russia accused the 2 Ukrainian artillery ships and a tugboat of illegally entering its waters, but Ukraine says Russia breached a treaty that gives them both access. U.S. Customs and Border Protection says it's arrested 69 people for illegally crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. The agency shut down the crossing from Tijuana to San Diego for 5 hours on Sunday and fired tear gas to push crowds back. Mexico says 500 people attempted the border rush, while the U.S. claims it was 1,000. General Motors says it will cut as many as 14,800 jobs, about 15% of its salaried positions, as the company focuses more on self-driving and electric cars. GM says it plans to discontinue several of its low-selling models next year, which will cut off production at plants in Michigan, Ohio, and Ontario.
17 meters, standing by for touchdown.
NASA staffers counted down as their InSight lander navigated the final, tricky seconds of a 6-month commute to Mars. It has just 7 minutes to slow from a speed of over 12,000 miles an hour, and engineers can't make last-second adjustments.
Touchdown confirmed.
It's the first mission that'll look at what's inside the planet, using a tool to drill 16 feet below the surface and seismometers to record Mars quakes.
You've heard the term Friday news dump. Dropping important or controversial information on a Friday afternoon is, in the business, a tried and true way to suppress major news. It's an even better suppression tool when you drop the news on the Friday after Thanksgiving, while people are busy shopping and digesting their turkey. So when the Trump administration released the 4th installment of the federally mandated National Climate Assessment on Friday, it was pretty obviously an attempt to bury it. So obvious that it kind of backfired and gave journalists the perfect narrative to justify reporting the hell out of it and calling up people like Ann Carlson, an environmental law professor.
I'm getting calls from reporters today, not last Friday, to discuss the assessment, which suggests to me that the assessment is in fact drawing attention.
The report itself is bleak. It explains that average temperatures in the U.S. have increased by 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit over the past century, and will rise by more than 3 additional degrees by the end of the century. Without significant greenhouse gas reductions, it could be several times that. The report also outlines a worst-case scenario future without reductions, where by 2090, more than $500 billion is lost from the economy each year because of impacts to things like health, infrastructure, and agriculture. That's roughly the equivalent of America losing the total economic output of Vermont, Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, Alaska, North Dakota, Rhode Island, Maine, Idaho, and Delaware each year. Even though 13 different federal agencies helped write the report, the president isn't totally buying it.
I've seen it, I've read some of it, and it's fine.
Did they say economic impact is devastating?
Yeah, I don't believe it. No, I don't believe it.
And in a statement, the White House emphasized that the report was started under the Obama administration and stated incorrectly that it was based on the most extreme scenario, the Trump administration equivalent of calling the nation's most qualified climate experts Obama-loving drama queens. Any change of heart from the White House seems unlikely. In Congress, the picture is more mixed. When you do a search for bills introduced this session that are tagged as related to climate change, more than 100 come up. But remember, some of this legislation is sponsored by climate change deniers to do things like specifically prohibit agencies, quote, from considering the social cost of carbon and taking any action. And since it's the end of the congressional session, it's unlikely any bills directly related to climate change would find their way to the president's desk. So if you have an administration unlikely to do anything about the dangers outlined in the report, and a Congress that is unlikely to move any legislation, that leaves action with the other branch of government, the courts. And in that branch, this report might make a big difference, because the administration is fighting in court to roll back all kinds of Obama-era climate regulations.
I think the fact that the report comes out of the administration itself and acknowledges so many harms that climate change is causing and is going to continue to cause undermines their legal position and strengthens the legal position of environmental groups, of states, that have public health organizations that are suing to try to strengthen the regulations rather than cutting them right now.
And that will be useful in multiple ongoing cases.
The Trump administration is trying to freeze standards to reduce greenhouse gases coming out of the tailpipes of cars. This report will hurt them in litigation on that case. I think that courts are going to begin to find that you can't have it both ways. You can't, on the one hand, say we don't need regulation, and on the other hand, acknowledge the real problem.
While the report may have given a legal win to the environment, significant laws to address how climate change is dealt with by the US government can't be achieved in courtrooms. And the report makes it clear that we don't have a lot of time to mess around.
There's where the pipe come out to here.
I see.
Where the septic tank is.
This is where the septic tank is?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to collect some samples, if you don't mind.
Yeah, happy to.
Thank you.
Okay. In 2017, scientists from Baylor College of Medicine published a study that caused a stir.
Like I said, a little bit of bad odor doesn't hurt me at all.
It demonstrated that a small sample of people in Lowndes County, Alabama, had hookworm, a parasitic infection normally found in developing countries, where people are exposed to raw sewage.
I'll mark it for here.
Now, the same researchers are performing a follow-up study to understand the link between the parasite and sanitation issues in rural Alabama.
Come around that side. Yeah.
Walter McMeans has lived in Alabama his whole life.
Is this raw sewage?
Yeah.
How long has it been like this?
Years.
Walter lives in an area of Alabama known as the Black Belt, a nickname which originally referred to both the racial makeup of the people living in the region and its dark clay-like soil. The ground doesn't absorb water well, so special septic tanks are required, which can run upwards of $10,000. Because of this, many opt for cheaper traditional septic tanks that fail.
Every time you use water, you're worried that the septic system might have some sort of failure.
I'm not worried about it. It does. And as the years pass, the problem get worse and worse. If we don't get something done about it, I don't know what you want to do. But no one should have to live like this. They be embarrassed by other people that come and they bring their children that they come once and they see the situation that you have. They're not coming back, and I can't blame them. So I wouldn't.
After sampling water and soil in Walter's backyard, Rogelio Mejia and his colleague Megan McKenna visited 2 other homes in Lowndes County. One used PVC piping to discharge raw sewage on the ground nearby.
What are the conditions that cause the environment in some areas to be prone to hookworm transmission?
Right. So the number one thing, besides the proper humidity, how does it go from the human to the soil? And that's improper sanitation.
What do you mean by improper sanitation?
So human waste.
Okay.
The people who are infected release eggs. Those eggs are part of the excrement.
Okay.
And if they end up on the ground and become the hookworm, the infectious hookworm, and then you step on them or walk by, and it goes into your skin and goes through the cycle. So it's a human to soil, soil to human infection.
Hookworm is a parasite that feeds on the blood of its host. When people have a lot of hookworms in their gut, the parasite can cause anemia and even limit children's ability to learn.
So one of the thoughts is, and especially in Alabama, that the myth of the slow-speaking sharecropper, usually African-American, there's some evidence that it was because of the hookworm burden.
Hookworm, or the germ of laziness as it's been called, was once widespread in the South. By around 1910, more than 7 million Southerners, both white and black, were infected, spurring a $1 million campaign to treat children in schools. As people moved to cities and sanitation improved in urban areas, hookworm became less of a focus, which is why there's very little information about its prevalence today. But many places in the rural South still struggle with sewage. In Lowndes County alone, where more than 70% of the population is Black and 30% of residents live in poverty, close to a third of surveyed households say they've had sewage back up into their homes or pool in open areas. And that's just one of 13 counties in Alabama's Black Belt, where more than half of the soil isn't suited for a septic system, according to the EPA.
We found more than 30% of these at-risk populations had hookworm.
Were you surprised by the results of that study?
I was. It was shocking to me. Conditions I saw matched several conditions that I've seen in countries such as Honduras and Guatemala.
After the initial hookworm study was published, the Alabama Department of Public Health criticized it, stating that the study wasn't large enough. But many Lowndes County residents worry that talking to researchers about their issues with raw sewage could result in a fine. The Department of Health also stated that the CDC had failed to replicate the study's results. As the state medical officer, Dr. Scott Harris oversaw the response.
We have a study that reached, kind of startling conclusions and wasn't supported by any other evidence that we had. And so,
Of which there was very little because nobody was looking at hookworm in Alabama.
Yeah, right. But if a third of all those folks have hookworm, we think that would show up sometime in some way.
Do you think it's possible, hypothetically, some people have a low burden of hookworm and that your surveillance system might have missed that, and that those hookworms might still be affecting their health, their overall health? Do you think that's possible?
I suppose that's possible, sure. But I guess the point that I feel like I really labor to make is whether or not people have hookworms, the problem is you have impoverished people that don't have adequate facilities. They don't have wastewater treatment.
Has there been an attempt to try and increase interventions within poorer communities in Alabama?
We've met with the governor's office on a couple of occasions, and ultimately it's about resources. If we were able to get, sort of community lagoon type systems, and for Lowndes County alone, the cost was about 9 figures, and that would have covered about 3/4 of the county. And that's only one county in the Black Belt, out of a dozen. And so it's a tremendous need for resources that we have, and the response right now has been really incremental and, frankly not adequate.
Walter says he's never had hookworm, but he still worries about the raw sewage in his yard. Rogelio and his team plan to take hundreds of additional samples throughout the Black Belt over the next year.
Is it hard to see this and to have to deal with this every day?
This may seem weird or stupid, but actually you've gotten used to it. It's like a hard bean in a pan.
Right.
You get used to it.
I reached a deal.
Reject this deal.
The British people want us to get on with a deal that honours the referendum, allows us to come together again as a country whichever way we voted. This is that deal, a deal that delivers for the British people, and I commend this statement to the House.
Prime Minister Theresa May is giving her Brexit deal the hard sell. She's embarking on what looks and sounds a lot like an election campaign. She's addressed the national media and written an open letter to the nation, pledging to campaign for this deal with her heart and soul. She's even hosted a talk radio phone-in.
Certainly there's no question of no Brexit, because the government needs to deliver on what people voted for in the referendum in 2016.
Only this is a fight May never actually wanted. She supported Remain, after all, and ironically, most of those who did want Brexit have deserted her, even as she defends it.
Are you confident you've got the rest of Cabinet's support?
14 ministers and government secretaries have quit so far over Brexit, and 5 more cabinet members are reportedly on the brink. This sprawling 500-page Brexit treaty, signed off by European leaders just yesterday, faces a vote in the British Parliament in 2 weeks. And it looks likely that MPs will vote it down. Suella Braverman was a Brexit minister in May's government until she quit earlier this month in protest. What was so bad about it?
The straw that broke the camel's back for me was the definition of the backstop. And the backstop means that the UK should be part of a customs union with the EU indefinitely, and it can only leave that customs union with the EU's approval. And for me, giving the EU a veto over the ultimate end state on this whole negotiation was unacceptable.
The EU has said that's it. There's no more negotiating to be done, and you can take this deal or leave it.
They have said that, and of course they would say that. They've been working on this. They've got a really good deal out of this negotiation.
Like Braverman, as many as 90 members of May's own party are threatening to vote against the deal. So May's strategy is to appeal directly to the British public. If she can get the people behind her, maybe some of those rebels will fall in line rather than face a backlash from their electors. May's message is that if lawmakers don't back this deal, there's a risk there won't be a deal at all. That's the worst-case scenario for both the UK government and the EU. But it's a chance that many MPs are willing to take.
It's my duty as a parliamentarian to safeguard the interests of what the people instructed us to do, and I'm going to do that by voting down this deal and doing what I can to stop it going through.
What do you think the chances of this deal going through Parliament?
At the moment, very, very low, almost nil, based on how people have declared their intentions. People are anxious. You know, I'm a loyalist. I've never rebelled against the party, and yet here I am rebelling and potentially bringing the government down. You know, this is not something I wanted to ever do.
If or when May loses the vote, the UK really will be in uncharted waters. At that point, May could call a general election or quit to give someone else a go. But the Prime Minister may actually have more leverage than anyone thinks. First, weak as her grip on office seems to be, nobody in her party has come forward to challenge her. Second, if her deal goes down in Parliament, May will likely have the spectre of total economic chaos to wave in front of EU negotiators to get them to give up a little bit more. If things got that far, it's likely that the pound would tank and the markets would lose it, which would only strengthen May's position if she took that deal back to Parliament and asked them to think again. All of which means that the deal failing in Parliament in 2 weeks might not actually be rock bottom for May. It's true that it might bring down her government, but it might also be what she needs to finally get her opponents to blink.
I try to get to, 1 or 2 shows a year, like the American Jail Association or the American Corrections Association.
Jamie Mosley is a successful inventor who started a company and made a lot of money with an e-cigarette designed to be smoked in jails, specifically his jail.
How are we doing on time? Do you know? 15 minutes.
Mosley is the jailer of Laurel County, Kentucky. He says he came up with his e-cigarette, which he calls Crossbar, out of necessity.
When I developed the product, it was really not with the intention of starting a company. I was just trying to solve a problem within my own facility.
Kentucky banned all tobacco products in jails in the mid-2000s over concerns about secondhand smoke. It may have made inmates healthier, but Mosley says it also made his life as a jailer a lot harder.
Many of these inmates are coming in a very intoxicated state, whether that be from drugs, heroin, coming off of all of that, and then without a cigarette at the same time, sometimes can create very, very volatile situations.
The idea for a jail-specific e-cigarette came quickly. Figuring out how to make one that inmates couldn't use as a weapon took a little longer.
One of our main objectives when we started was to be able to do this.
Oh, wow.
Everything out there had a metal casing or was a very, very hard plastic casing that could be hammered down into a shank. We addressed that fairly easily, but we also wanted something with a very low voltage so that you couldn't utilize it for an ignition source to start a fire with. But we wanted something that was very...
You gotta think of everything like that.
You do, and that's the big advantage, I guess, that I have. I live with 550 inmates every single day, and I understand their behavior.
The 3rd floor. All right, anybody need E6 today? Sir. Okay, so you're gonna get the inmate's ID, make sure he is who he is, give him his ID back. Next thing you wanna go do is you're gonna check and make sure this is the one I sold him last time I came around.
These men in Mosley's jail are part of a specialized drug rehabilitation program. For them, e-cigs are a useful crutch.
How'd you end up here?
Well, my drug addiction led me here. A cocaine charge and a theft charge. and I've been here going on 90 days.
Were you in other facilities where they didn't have any e-cigarette option?
Yes, I've been in other facilities. Fayette County has no e-cig option down there.
So what's that like when you show up there and you have nothing?
Oh, it's nerve-wracking. It's, you can imagine going from smoking 2 packs of cigarettes on the street to nothing.
What'd you think when you got here and found out they had this?
I thought I was in heaven for a minute, you know, if you know the truth about it.
Mosley's invention may help keep inmates happy, but it's also a lucrative business. Crossbar is available in some 33 prisons and jails nationwide, and the company is expected to do $3.5 million in sales this year.
You know, they are also, of course, kind of a classically captive audience for your own product. They're addicted,
yeah,
and they don't have any other choices.
You know, we're not trying to capitalize on or develop a customer base, you know, to sell to these people beyond release. It's a tool, and it was designed for the benefit of the facilities, and if it helps them to cooperate and keeps my officers safer, I think that that's a win-win for everybody.
It also means a lot of revenue for the jails. They buy each e-cig from Mosley for $2 to $3, and then sell them to inmates at $10 to $15 a pop. At Mosley's jail, which buys the e-cigs at cost, the proceeds are put back into things that benefit inmate welfare, something Kentucky state law mandates.
So one of the first things that we did was we brought in an electronic health record system. This is an item that a typical jail would not be able to afford. With everything that we got, it was about $75,000. And we were able to purchase that through our commissary proceeds, the profits that were generated from the sale of our electronic cigarette.
Are you going regular or menthol today? Regular, sir.
Of course, the people who pay for these benefits are the inmates themselves.
Yeah, it's considered a luxury, yeah.
It is considered a luxury a little bit. Definitely exclusive items.
My dad's, you know, he's the one buying them for me, so I don't like to ask for anything. So the cost of them kind of keeps me from smoking them as much.
We heard they're the #1 purchase at the commissary.
Oh, I'd imagine they probably are, yeah.
So are you helping inmates, or are you also kind of exploiting them too?
You know, I think that's a great question. I think the same thing can be said for, should we be giving them caffeine? Are we making their blood pressure go up because we're giving them chips that have that are loaded with sodium?
If you own the chip company. I try and figure out if this is like a story about, you know, all the things you're able to do because of the e-cigs, or if this is a story about a jailer who saw an opportunity and made a whole lot of money.
I don't know. I guess that'll be for everybody else to decide when they see it. Making money selling e-cigs is very easy. Keeping people alive and helping people is very hard. My heart and my passion is here.